we'll open the floor for Q&A. يعني we'd like the comments to be brief and the question to be concise, and please just state the name and the affiliation.
My name is Hannah Saak, Professor of Economics, Faculty of Economics, Political Science. I have two comments. I agree with all the policies that were given or drawn by the World Bank. However, I was expecting something different or something new in addition to all what we agree about, which is that most of the economies now are moving towards the knowledge-based economy. So maybe the only statement I found referring to this is the lifelong learning. However, I think that the policies should be a bit advanced, should be a bit adaptive to the trend all over the world, because we need to direct ourselves more towards how to enhance the youth to create their own jobs instead of saying we should as a government or we should as a private sector. The idea now is that people should think out of the box, as they say, and I think that the policy should be more adaptive to the idea of the knowledge-based economy. The second, and this was mentioned with Mr. Ahmed when you began to think about the skills that we need to enhance the youth or to teach the youth. So I think we should focus more towards the knowledge-based economy rather than the extractive or the original traditional one. The second point is related to the ILO concerning the decent job. I agree on the importance of the decent job and the social protection. However, what's the incentive for the informal sector to be part of this? Because at a certain point, especially in Egypt, when you talk about social protection and the decent job, he might say, I don't want to be formal, I don't want to be exposed to the taxation. So there's a bit of conflict here. Thank you.
We'll group the questions and I will address them at the end. Lady in front row.
I would like to thank ECES for this very important roundtable. My name is Hala Tahir. I'm a former labor counselor. I spent my whole life at the Ministry of Manpower. And I witnessed hands-on on the issues of manpower in Egypt. I will tackle very quickly and address some points. First of all, when we talk about employment, what are the policies that we would like to address? And what are the strategies that we wish to address? The Egyptian state policies in general, who is setting these policies and how do they do this? The SMEs, is this the solution? And if not, as I participated in a training for SMEs, and I touched upon the problems, practical problems. And if we wish the SMEs to have SMEs that might be short-term solution, because I totally share what Mr. Ahmed Al-Alfi said. We would need to move to knowledge-based employment. But we need the SMEs within the framework of helping them to succeed. But how would they succeed if they are random? We need to set up plans and connect them to industries to have the needed marketing. The second thing is training. Training is a significant issue and would require more than one round table, because training in Egypt is a waste of time and money in training that does not actually have a return on what we would require.
Hussein Shukri, HS Securities. Thank you all for your great presentations. And I have two comments. The first one directed to Dr. A, and the second to Mr. Ali. Under macroeconomic policy, I would have thought that you would include budget deficit and foreign debt, or national debt, including foreign as well, as a way to ensure stability, macroeconomic stability. To Mr. Alfi, you've mentioned that you would prefer equity financing for SMEs, because this will encourage innovation and creating jobs for the future. But I think we need both. We need debt financing because they are directed at a portion of society that is not educated and needs this type of debt financing to grow very basic jobs. On the other hand, you're absolutely right. For equity financing, is directed to a different group of entrepreneurs that are highly educated and very technology, very high input of technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Omar. I'd like to thank ECES for addressing this very important topic. Hanay Hilali, I'm the former Managing Director of the Social Fund and with the UN on Sustainable Development. First, I would like to address my comment to Asad and Christine. What are your initiatives and to address the mismatch between the skilled labor and the job opportunities in the market? Are there any potential future initiatives in this regard? Second, to Ahmed Al-Alfi, and I've seen for real the pitches he had with the amazing ideas of entrepreneurs and the cycles that have graduated and have seen the sun. The entrepreneurship awareness. We still lack the entrepreneurship awareness in Egypt. So I'm addressing this not only to the distinguished panelists, but also to the government. I think the youth centers, Wazarat al-Shabab, Marakiz al-Shabab, would be an excellent venue to promote entrepreneurship awareness. Youngsters who graduate from universities are afraid to take the risk. They don't have the know-how, as Alfie has said. They don't know how to make a cash flow, a business plan, the training, the marketing, and so on and so forth. But youth centers could be a very good venue. Education, I mean, including entrepreneurship in schools curricula, would be also a good potential to promote this from the start, and also universities. Thank you very much.
My best half.
Encouraging my wife.
I said my best half.
I speak in Arab.
The issue we are having in Egypt is that we are addressing a general issue in a partial manner. Egypt, since 60 years now, lacks to an identity of the Egyptian economy. We did not define the Egyptian economy, and this is reflected over the past 60 years. Well, we will close it, we will open it, we will foster private sector, we will not foster private sector. Well, the employment and unemployment issues, well, has no identity or definition in our economy. As Dr. Asad talked about Miles, he said, he was talking about macroeconomic reform, the economic climate. Well, all the miles he mentioned had to do with macroeconomic. And most of them are calling upon more economic freedom. Are we ready for such economic freedom? Well, I think that the questions are rather philosophical and ideological. We have to define the identity of the economy to be able to define the path we will be taking. Thank you. Gamal Morsi, Department of Manpower. Well, something that we did not address, that is an assessment of the job opportunities in Egypt. Second, the rate of turnover is very high, and we cannot actually have a compilation of the jobs, and the number of opportunities, job opportunities for women in Egypt is very limited. Well, we do not have any job stock exchange in Egypt. And if I wish to look for job opportunities, I go to Al Wasit or any other source. Why don't we have a public source to announce any job vacancies in the country? Nohad Demiri, consultant, African Development Bank.
My question concerns Miles. So I didn't understand the point concerning linking social protection with productive employment. Would you please elaborate? Thank you.
I have the last inquiry, in fact. You mentioned that the unemployment is 14, sorry, that the saving rate is 14%. The last figures I saw were talking about 5 and 6%. And the Ministry of Planning, they did not deny that. And they said that actually it could be interpreted as being higher because the household saving is in the 20–22%, but the lack of investment from the government side and the budget deficit bring the figure down, and they did not, as I said, object to the 6% figure. Right, so we'll start with Asad maybe.
Thank you very much. All extremely interesting and thoughtful questions. I'm not sure I'll have good answers to all of them, but I'll try my best. Let me actually start from Omar's the last question on the savings rate. So I'm not familiar with that 6% because there are different definitions of savings rate: household savings, private sector savings, government savings, foreign savings. So I'm not sure what that refers to. I think the number I was using, and my economist here, but she has left. Sarah is not. She would have confirmed. I think is the national saving rates that includes both the private and the public, and the private includes household and private businesses savings rate. No, I'm saying that it needs to be close to 30%. Yeah, I think the figure comes from CAPMAS, and it's a national statistic. What I'm saying, and I think the policies for improving the savings rate, I think we can talk about it. I think you're absolutely right. Part of the reason for the low savings is because of the government deficit that you were talking of, and the budget deficit, because that means that the government is dissaving. So that needs to be corrected. But most governments in today's world are dissaving. But obviously the magnitude of that needs to be thought through in a way that is consistent with inflation. So that brings me to the question that you had, that why didn't I talk about budget deficit? I think there was well, in some ways it is behind low inflation. So if you want to have low inflation, you have to bring down your deficit, because so it is embedded there. So, but I fully agree. And I think my third bullet on the macro, I'll have to open the presentation again, talked about financial policies. So obviously macroeconomic, monetary policy, monetary fiscal policies, they all have to be prudent at a level that makes sense. So I'm not ideological about a balanced budget or about having a surplus budget. I think we have former Minister of Finance here also. So I think the size of the fiscal policies and the position of the budget has to be consistent with the needs of the country in a way that makes sense for the macroeconomic targets that the country sets. But I fully agree that you have to have a deficit that makes sense. Although in today's world, after the global financial crisis, all of some of the standard rules that we were using in terms of what is an appropriate level of the deficit over a fiscal cycle, what is an appropriate role for monetary policy, everything is now there's a lot of innovation in that space. Let's put it that way. So
But you're still at the 3 to 5%.
Yes.
Not in the 12 to 3%.
Yeah, but Egypt, just as many other countries in the world, also took exceptional measures in order to address the global financial crisis. Egypt has also been trying to address a very significant crisis, and I think hopefully, I think the path to fiscal consolidation has been mapped out. Just to address some of the, I think there was a question.
Foreign debt.
So foreign debt, I think the numbers are, it's about 80% of GDP or so, and the total the stock of foreign debt.
It's 100% of GDP.
Total debt is about
125%.
125% of GDP. Foreign debt is about 30.
About 40%.
40%. I think it's much less than that. Yeah. Foreign debt is about whatever. I don't have the number with me.
Official figures are 80 billion.
$80 billion, yes, 80 billion, or which is whatever the equivalent is. But I think this is part of a strategy to try to meet, and that is why you need to increase the national savings and improve the budgetary position. But these are all transitional challenges. You know, with growth, a lot of these things become more manageable if you can generate growth, and especially growth with employment. Then I think, you know, the debt situation becomes.
You need to attract FDI.
In order to support the financing needs of the country. So if the savings rate is low, then FDI has to be an important part, and therefore, and for that you need to have a good investment climate and good macroeconomic management, and attract people, attract investment that wants to tap into the skills of the population and overcome the ceilings that Ahmed was talking of. And so people need to be, I think the skill set has to be attractive for investors. There was a question on social protection and the link to productive employment. So there are different ways that you can set up a social protection or a support program. One is the one that I was talking about when I meant productive employment is to link it up by the labor market. Let me give you an example which may help you clarify. So suppose you identify a poor family. They know they are very poor, you know, but then you say, we will help you, provide you with a transfer. If the young men and women, you know, if there are youth who are in that family who are in that poor family, that you also go and take some courses or skills development that will help you get a job. So if you try to provide that transfer conditional on someone actually getting some skills, that may help them get a job. So that would be something that would, or you require that person to actively go and seek a job. So I think there are ways in which you can actually do social protection that might actually link it up to the labor market. You could have programs of labor-intensive employment, that require people to actually enroll in a program and get a certain amount of hands-on training in the job. So these are all things that can help you develop the unemployed develop the skills that might actually increase the probability of getting a job. So those are the type of things that I was talking of. So it's not just a transfer that might actually get the person into some degree of dependency on the state. The question I think that you had said on the knowledge economy, yeah, obviously, you know, we live in a knowledge-based world. I didn't get into the themes or the sectoral, you know, definition of what needs to be done for different sectors. But if you are talking about a lot of the things that that Ahmed was also talking about in terms of the type of skills that people need and the type of things that should be coming out from the education system. So if you develop a knowledge economy, you know, it's very difficult to define all the type of skills that you need, but we all know some of the core, you know, in addition to the technical skills that a person might need, you know, computers or whatever, so the role of ICT in learning becomes very important, but also the ability to analyze a problem, the ability to problem solve, you know, you know, the ability to manage interactions also, not only with the computer, but with others who might be a client. So obviously those things are very important, but those are the type of the details of the type of things, the way that the incentives in the education system needs to be set in order to generate those type of responses. I think there was a question on the mismatch and specifically on what the World Bank and I guess the ILO is doing actually to address the mismatch in the labor market. You know, I believe, and I think for Egypt, the challenge is more on the generation of jobs and on the promotion of skills. I think, you know, it's not enough jobs are being generated, and where there are jobs, you know, the people coming out into the labor market don't have the skills to actually get there. So it is less, you know, when I was a student in England many years ago during Margaret, you know, I'm talking of, it's embarrassing, it's talking of the mid-80s, you know, when Margaret Thatcher, well, just after Margaret Thatcher. So there was a lot of this discussion on structural unemployment and what is the rate of NAIRU, you know. This is a rate of unemployment which is driven by structural needs. And in England, you know, you used to go to any town center, there will be a job center. And you could go and these were the government-sponsored jobs offices that would help you provide that matching. Of course, the world has changed, and now you have a lot of platforms, including in Egypt, including in the region and in Egypt also. There are platforms for job matching. But the fundamental challenge for Egypt is to improve the investment climate, to simplify all the things that have been discussed by others also, to actually, you know, let loose an engine and a dynamic in the economy that creates a lot of jobs domestically. So I think one has to focus more on that as well as on the skills and the generation side. And of course, there are always some degree of mismatch. You know, I was talking to a lot of young people at a youth university, to a whole the undergraduate class. When I asked them where are they going to look for, you know, what are they going to do after they graduate? They said, all go to Cairo. Well, I said, why? But they said, they knew the job market. They said, there are no jobs in the youth. So we'll all go to Cairo. And where do you want to work? We want to work with the government. You know, the mindset is still one of, you know, we come out of university and you get a government job. But there are no jobs in the government also. So unless people have the type of skills that Ahmad was talking of, and in the type of the knowledge economy and the new areas for growth, you know, these people will be part of the new unemployed pool. It is a fundamental challenge of the mindset. So one of the professors actually stood up. The World Bank should help the government, you know, create more jobs in the government. Every young person should get a guaranteed job. But that is that old social contract that comes from Nasser's time, right? You come out of the university, everyone gets a public sector job. That contract is broken. It's no longer valid. So the new contract has to be about the private sector actually being the engine of growth. And that also requires a mind shift in the population and what they are expecting from the state. And also from the state, that the solution to job creation is for the state. So it's not only about the husband getting out of the way, it's also, or the man, but also the state getting out of the way of job creation, right? Of creating the space for the private sector to actually operate. Economic freedom, I think our colleague here talked about the importance of economic freedom. I think that's absolutely essential. So anyway, I'll pass it on to you. You wanted to go next?
Yeah, right. Okay, thank you very much for all the comments. Maybe I'll take Abla's comment, and it was reiterated by someone in the back as well, on job projections. So, I mean, the ILO does global job projections, but we don't do consistent, regular job projections for each country. So that can be done, certainly with the tools, but we don't consistently do it. So I think Egypt is doing clearly the right thing by prioritizing certain sectors that are promising, and by trying to be coherent in policy approaches, and trying to mainstream, as we call it, employment into industrial policies, into investment policies, into trade policies. So in the Vision 2030, that's been an area where the ILO has worked with the Ministry of Planning as well to mainstream this, to mainstream employment into all those different policy domains. You know, often in countries there are political employment targets. You know, we will create 5 million jobs by, you know, and then they come to the ILO and ask, and how do we do that? And so then we come with all the set of policies and approaches, you know, that I alluded to in the beginning, and that my colleague has already elaborated on much. So let me try to respond to your comments and add some of the things we have been doing here in Egypt and are still working on. So on informality, your question was, you know, there's a disincentive for the small firms because, so now we talk about informality in the informal sector enterprises. And taxes is just one dimension, right? I mean, if you are a legal entity, you can market yourself better. You have more access to two markets. You could maybe participate in some public bidding or whatever. So I mean, you clearly have other advantages than just paying the tax advantages to grow. So, you know, those are incentives. You can place incentives for business development, accessing business development services only when you register. You know, there's a whole plethora of things that, that can be done. But there's also again, the dimension of informal employment in informal sector enterprises. And there it's not just the awareness among employers, you know, to enforce and actually apply labor legislation, but it's also the awareness on the side of the job seekers that it's a short-term decision they take if they prefer to get £2,000 cash or 1,500 but have insurance. Yeah? So that's clearly something we have seen as a big issue. There is awareness raising needed on this. So on, there was a question about there is training and then there's no return for it, and I think that that's linked a bit to the skills mismatch question and the big subject of quality of education, of relevance of education and training in Egypt. So how do we make sure that what we train is what employers need? And there are many different ways to do that. But the most effective one is to bring the two worlds closer together. And what does that mean? It doesn't only mean involving employers in the setting of standards and the design of training programs, occupational standards, qualification standards, but it means engaging them in the training themselves. So I'm talking of work-based learning. And that's a big area where more investment and more awareness raising as well is needed, because systems exist. We have about 7 different types of apprenticeship systems in Egypt. We are launching next month an ILO review of those different apprenticeship systems, and they are, you know, managed by different rules. So that makes it very difficult for employers to know, you know, how can I engage and participate. Overall, the share of students that benefit from work-based learning as part of their formal education and training is about 2%. It's really very small. The same holds true for university education and internships. Yes, there are some joint programs, and that's all great, but you need way more of that to make a difference. There's the whole area of intermediation services, and the ILO is now engaging in a new project to support career centers in universities. We've worked with the Ministry of Manpower on strengthening employment services. We're working with the Ministry of Youth as well to provide what we call job search clubs in youth centers. And that's through the generous support of the Canadians. There are NGOs offering services, but as I said, this is not coordinated, and you know, still a lot of capacity building is needed. On entrepreneurship, the approach to include it in the curricula is the most cost-effective, as is for career guidance, by the way. We have worked with technical colleges, with PVTD. They have included entrepreneurship. We are working in partnership with other agencies on including entrepreneurship in the technical education system now, which would benefit 2 million students. So all of that are initiatives that we are technically supporting. And we've worked with the Social Fund, now continue work with the SME agency on this, and the Ministry of Youth has approached us because they are interested in offering entrepreneurship in the youth centers. So this will hopefully also happen in the near future. maybe also to add on the mismatch, because now changing the education system, aligning the education system better with what the labor market needs is the medium to longer term solutions. There are some short term solutions which we call active labor market programs. And Egypt has also designed some programs, foundations invest in training for employment schemes that on the one hand should help industries get workers that are better skilled, but at the other hand should help job seekers find a job more easily and be supported in finding a job. Now, the issue that we've seen in Egypt has been that the targeting of the people who would benefit from those projects has not been very, very elaborate, meaning that if you don't have clear criteria, people that might have found a job themselves will get into that program. So you're not having any effect on the labor market. So those short-term programs should rather target those that are more disadvantaged because they have more problems accessing the labor market. So if you invest in those programs as state, you want to target those that have more of a problem, more of a difficulty in accessing. So we've also piloted training for employment programs, kind of the ILO way, which has, according to an impact assessment we did, yielded positive results, including in terms of formalizing employment relations. Because what we have piloted is an approach whereby employers receive this recruitment and training subsidy for new people, yet only if they commit to giving a 12-month formal contract. Yeah? Okay, I need to speed up. All right. So that has actually improved the chances of those people to retain a formal job. The question on knowledge-based economy, I think it's very important. You're absolutely right. So we have to think in all policies about how the way our economy works, and the ILO has a big initiative on the future of jobs, on how that impacts the world of work, and so we have to think how our policies might have to be different. I think there's clearly also a risk that in this knowledge economy that talks about a lot of interconnectivity and higher level skills, that we risk of losing behind people that do not, form part of that upper group of people. So it's even more important to get the education and training system right and to focus on portable skills and on those core skills that my colleague already referred to. So making teachers aware of the different teaching methodologies needed to instill these skills into people. It's not enough to do a 2-day course on communication skills. I think I've covered. Actually, there's one more last thing, sorry. And it's about focusing on what works. So any interventions need to be monitored and evaluated, right? So we need to learn from what's happening. And that's also an area where a lot of investment and capacity building is needed. There is an initiative called Takim, evaluation in North Africa that looks at youth employment interventions. So anyone interested in that, please invite you to look at all the rich material. There's a joint initiative with the World Bank as well on what works in youth employment. So there'll also be next month or maybe in April a workshop for Egypt to build on all the experiences from Takim in the last couple of years in North Africa. Thank you.
So I'll start with Hussein, the comment you made. I agree 100%. We definitely have to have debt and equity but I do want to make a couple of points on the equity investment. Number one is several of these training programs, you spend $1,000, $2,000 to create a job in training and employer subsidy. For $3,000, including all the failed companies, you create a job and you get a 20% compounded return on the money instead of spending it as an expense. And so all I'm advocating is an additional focus on that segment that's completely ignored. And I would tell you all the venture capital money in Egypt, in the US, it's 0.25% of GDP, is the amount of money invested in high growth companies, which has generated 20% of the GDP over the last 30, 40 years. Here, it's nothing. The total amount in Egypt is about $150 million spread over 4 years. So $40, $50 million a year maximum when you include some private participants. Totally insufficient. Egypt, with the talent that Egyptian youth have, could absorb 10 times that easily and create jobs. A sample company like that, that we invested in many, many years ago, started 20 years ago, grew to 1,000 techies, to 1,000 developers. The company was called IT-Works. That guy hired 8,000 people and trained them and fired them, or they left, to get to 1,000 employees. His exit, so that's the training for skills program. Every one of those people came in and got trained and learned how to work in a high growth company. And his ex-employees left and started somewhere between 170 and 200 new companies. And when development agencies invest in high growth tech companies in the IFC, they don't measure this additional trickle down impact that they have on the economy. But it's very material that one successful company didn't just give them a 20% IRR, it gave them 150 new companies that started out of that created additional investment opportunities and additional jobs. So the other thing I wanted to, there's a big focus on entrepreneurship, and everybody promotes entrepreneurship, and I think we need to separate. I discourage everybody from being an entrepreneur, okay? And I fund entrepreneurs, because 99% of people aren't qualified to be entrepreneurs, but they need to learn business skills. They need to learn business skills that they can adopt inside their company, whether they are a good employee for a heavy industry company or for a telco or for anybody, and not to encourage everybody to go out and create their own company. We don't need to teach people how to go do the legal work to create a company. We need to teach them how to do better business in whatever they're doing and how to innovate and collaborate. And I always joke with the kids, I tell them, in the US, we were really very individualistic culture, but we work really well in teams. Here, we're very social culture, and we can't work in teams, right? Those are the skills that you need to teach people, not how to go hire a lawyer and incorporate a company. So, and then the last thing is, well, maybe we'll meet here in a year, because we're doing an experiment with those 3 things I talked about, to take a group take a town, Inna, and try and find the top 500 youth, the most creative ones, and teach them these skills and let them go back into their society, not to start companies, just to be a better plumber, better at picking whatever crop it is you pick, okay, a better car mechanic, and to incorporate base business skills in that. And that's a program that hopefully in a year we'll start seeing some impact and see what happens in that. And the other thing is, I agree with the Asyut Cairo-centric, right? We're opening a tech center, a campus in Asyut, to be able to absorb those great kids, because there really is talent, but somehow we all insist that they all come to us. And so hopefully more and more people can go out and take the show on the road to them.
Thank you, Ahmed. Abla would like to say a few words.
Well, one of the issues tackled by Ahmed is the definition of entrepreneurship that we are using in Egypt. That is not a good one. What he is talking about is the entrepreneurship that is someone who is capable of having a project using a good criteria. But in Egypt, whenever someone wishes to have his own startup, we call him an entrepreneur. Well, this has to be tackled by the Ministry of Youth, and I think that this distinction is very important. The other thing is that Assad said that he met with young people in Asyut. Most of them said that they wish to work in the public sector and they want to go to Cairo. It's not about culture, it's about the system of the country. The 1962 law that is governing the employment in public sector is not cancelled up till now, and he can be waiting for this public job until he retires. Secondly, when we go to the bank seeking a loan, one of the guarantees or the collaterals is to have a guarantor from any public servant. Or to have a fixed income. Third, how can I wish him to stay within his governorate when I do not create jobs in his governorate, so I can encourage governorates to keep their citizens. Four, if we would like to address entrepreneurship and training, we have to have a clear investment plan showing the potentials of different sectors within the value chain related thereto, and what are the opportunities, existing opportunities. And lastly, if I do not change the educational system, we know that we have too much physicians and a shortage in nurses, especially quality nurses. However, the system of the secondary certificate ثانوية عامة is pushing everyone to go to the medical school and not the nursing institute or the nursing school. Well, Christine, you were talking about the employer to be involved, not only to set up the standards of the training, but also to participate. Well, the Singaporean experience is one of the excellent ones, because it is defining what is needed, and they are training the people in the right path where they can find jobs. Well, finally, I would like to tell you that on the 7th, we will be having a conference on access to finance for SMEs from a totally different perspective, that is the non-banking mechanisms. You will be receiving invitations, but I just wanted to announce that so that you can call upon anyone concerned with SMEs to attend. Thank you all, and looking forward to seeing you soon.